It's my pleasure today to introduce Kate Robinson, this year's CILIP president, to talk to the ILIG AGM. Kate has been the university librarian at the University of Bath since 2012, following a career in public, private and corporate life, so covering most of our sectors. She has been active in CILIP in a variety of capacities, including as a mentor, as chair of the Professional Registration and Accreditation Board, and as chair of the Sector Development Committee. As president, her theme for the year is workplace. Actually, can I just stop and ask Kate, because I've seen workplace development and I've seen workforce development.
Yes, I think of it more as workforce, more about people.
Yes, I thought that was probably so. But somewhere
yes.
It says workplace development. Anyway, Kate's talk for us today will highlight the opportunities generated by international partnerships, such as the one between her university library at Bath and the university library at Stellenbosch in South Africa. So, Kate, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Leslie. So I wanted to give you a bit of an overview about what we've been up to, and it's really a case study. The way I see it, university libraries and librarians, we're collaborative by nature. I think we share ideas and approaches, and we often open our doors to each other's communities. And increasingly, researchers and institutions are looking for a collaborative approach with international partners, and that's certainly true of us here at Bath. Strategic alliances are being developed and formed, and libraries are very well placed, I think, to support these. So since 2012, the University of Bath in the UK and Stellenbosch in South Africa have found research interests in common. And this has been really the catalyst for the university libraries to develop strong and fruitful working relationships. And in this talk, I'm going to reflect on long friendship and the benefits that it's brought for service workforce and for personal development rather than personnel development. It's intended to act as a case study to provoke thought around what is and what could be possible for our libraries as our institutions forge new connections and operate in different groupings with new allies. It's how we see, take and make opportunity. So, a little bit about who we are. The University of Bath is a mid-sized top 10 UK university. We were established in 1966, so we're young, and we were located in the UNESCO World Heritage City of Bath. We've got approximately 19,000 students. 32% of these are from outside the UK. We have a really strong track record for student satisfaction. We were ranked first in England and second in the UK in the last NSS, excluding highly specialised institutions. 87% of our research was considered to be world leading or internationally excellent in the 2014 ref. And I can still say that because the Research Excellence Framework is actually just about to be announced tomorrow. So today I'm telling you that in 2014, we were world leading and internationally excellent. Fingers crossed for tomorrow. Situated in the winelands of South Africa, can you see the attraction? Stellenbosch University dates back to the 17th century. There was a school of education there around about that time, which is where they trace their heritage. There are about 30,000 students at Stellenbosch, and they place great emphasis on encouraging a diverse community, both culturally and economically, although I think it's fair to say that the majority of their students are still relatively local to the area and Africa. Their staff are considerably more international, however. Their research is world leading and they are really high at the world rankings. So a very natural partner and possibly a little aspirational for Bath in some respects, because there is a breadth at Stellenbosch that as a predominantly science and technology based university, perhaps we don't have. But both universities aim for excellence in both teaching and in research. And you can see the picture here. One is the city of Bath, an aerial view, and the other is the university at Stellenbosch. And this little bit here at the front, I don't know if you can see my cursor, that's the library. The library is underground. So this is Ellen Tice. She is the Principal Director of the Library and Information Services at Stellenbosch University. What we found is that we're very alike in our services and our collections, but that it's our differences that also add a richness to our collaboration. There's an awful lot to talk about and a lot of potential really between the synergies between the two libraries. But for today, I'd just like to touch briefly on these three areas in which we've been working. So services. wow, what can I say? Same, but different. The picture at the top is of Stellenbosch's research commons, Carnegie Research Commons. And the one underneath I'll tell you a little bit about in a minute. I don't have a hat like that, although I wish I did. So my Vice-Chancellor had visited Stellenbosch. This is back around about 2012 time. She'd met and was really impressed by Ellen and thought that Ellen and I would get along well. She was a Vice-Chancellor who liked to build things, and she wanted me to visit to see their Carnegie Research Commons, which is a research environment intended for use by postgraduate students at master's and doctoral level, as well as academic staff and researchers at Stellenbosch. My VC wanted one. She wanted one of these, and I was apparently to design it for her. Ellen was very generous, and she was a welcoming host, sharing her ideas with me and her ambitions for this space. While I was there, she asked me to present to her colleagues about our research services and structures. So while Stellenbosch have lots of partners, this was relatively new to Bath and new to me. And so I was thinking very carefully about what to share. I chose to speak about library services, collaboration and innovation across the research lifecycle, which is an area which we were particularly and still are particularly strong, along with a brief session on augmented reality and the research environment and research engagement. So that's where the augmented reality piece comes in. I've been doing a really interesting piece of work. It was very innovative at the time. I think 2012-13 was a time when not very many people were playing with AR, but I like experimenting with technology, apart from Teams video recording. But it was a load of fun, and we've been doing some really interesting stuff, augmenting all sorts of things, including our images of research, which was a community engagement project about getting our own research into the community. So the audience for this talk was very mixed. It included their academics and also their international relations office. The audience were very engaged, and it sparked a really good conversation and quite a deal of discussion over my visit there. I felt that this was incredibly beneficial for both our libraries because I got to demonstrate that we had something interesting to share. And this in turn reflected really well on Ellen with her peers in the other university services. So very much libraries are cutting edge, libraries are doing something different. So very much a win-win situation. Possibly the most important thing was, though, that Ellen and I hit it off. And I don't know when my VC was looking at whether we would get on or not. It was because she was a psychologist by discipline that she could spot that. But she was completely right. We got on incredibly well. And I think sometimes it's these interpersonal connections that are the glue that holds such relationships together. I thought we had a good deal in common, but I thought with regard to our institutions, this is rather than me and Ellen, we have a lot in common, but there were just enough differences to make this a really interesting alliance. And I was really keen to keep it going. And so the next thing that I did, determined to carry on this newfound friendship, was to build a special relationship. That's what I was after. And the first thing I did was to tap into Ellen's professional networks to try to ensure that we bumped into each other again, either in person or virtually. So I persuaded my Vice-Chancellor that she wanted to fund our membership to one of the organisations that Ellen was very active in. And I let Ellen know then that we were on the same circuit. And that was the OCLC Research Partnership. It was a really good space to be in, useful for us in any case, particularly with our being very active in the research services side of academic librarianship. And it was a non-exclusive club that we were able to join, and very nice to find Ellen there, who was also extremely active in this area. So back in Bath, I started to design our research commons. And at Ellen's request, I shared our staffing structure and our job roles for all of our research services teams with her. And I set to work with our physical spaces, and Ellen began to reshape her staffing structures around our teams and our structures, mimicking what we'd shared with her. Well, pretty soon I found myself back in Stellenbosch. I was invited as a speaker for their biennial symposium, and this was to be the first of a regular pattern of trips. This is an international symposium hosted by Stellenbosch, as I say, biennially, and it's an incredibly useful place to come together and very cutting edge. I did find that it was very gratifying when I got back there to find that their restructuring had gone extremely well, and I could also share the success of our new spaces up on campus. I was greeted like an old friend, and I re-established connections with colleagues, and I was asked to help with the chairing of sessions. And I began to find myself treated very much as a preferred partner. Given that Stellenbosch has lots of partners, I think that was for us, that was really important that we could establish such a strong relationship. The networking in South Africa is very like the close community we have here in HE in the UK and in the other sectors across the UK. And I made friends with their friends, which also helped. So this time I chose to talk about collaborations and presented on the benefits of working with other libraries in the UK this time as a regional consortia, which Sarah will be very familiar with. And this was to forward the research ambitions of the university while extending our reach and demonstrating the worth of the libraries in these partnerships. So again, I was thinking carefully about what I would share, and this was very much about partnership working. And this then formed the basis of some very good over dinner discussions. And pretty soon we were thinking about what more we might share and what we could do together. So the more we discussed, the more synergies and areas of interest we found. We shared our thoughts, we shared our ideas and our innovations. And while the UK looks across to Europe as a natural research collaboration, the South Africa looks to Africa and to the USA. And it was so interesting and refreshing to see how we approach the same things, but slightly differently. And perhaps in part, this is based really on the company that we keep. This picture here is of Alvina and Marie. These are two senior staff at Stellenbosch who visited Bath to work with our research services teams. And those teams are around open access, archives, research analytics, and research data. Sharing their experience on a peer-to-peer basis, and also presenting what they saw to ourselves and our colleagues in the university community. So this was really mirroring my experiences in Stellenbosch to get Alvina and Marie to do the same thing, but again to our international office and to our academics. And I think this is really important. So while Ellen and I were working together, we weren't really going to see real benefits unless our colleagues were engaged as well. But there were real benefits for us as well, seeing Stellenbosch University librarians reflecting to our own university community what they thought of us and praising us, which was a lovely thing to have. Sometimes I think we can be a little invisible, and it's nice when we have advocates, and this was a really good way of doing that. So the mention really of other colleagues and the benefits that we see with them, I think really takes me nicely onto collaboration, but also I think to personal development. And this is the next thing that I wanted to talk about. Research data management, well, it was a hot topic. And my very innovative colleague, Alex Ball, who's the taller of the two chaps that you see on the screen there, had the idea of a new tool to make research data management fun. And he also had the skills to make it happen. His idea was to create a research data management find your own adventure game. I don't know if any of you were around in the 1970s, but find your own adventure games were incredibly popular. They were ones where you start in a fictional character and you find your own, you make decisions as you go through a book as it was, and you decide where you're going to go. So this is what Alex decided to do to make research data management fun. And he also had the skills to make it happen, as I mentioned. So the idea is it's going to be a safe, self-paced text adventure, digital obviously, where the player takes the role of a researcher working on a project. He makes decisions about data management that affect the outcome of the project and the publication of the findings from the project. So it seemed that this would be an ideal thing to do together. And so an alliance was formed and plans were made. And Alex started to work with Simon Simago, and that's Simon next to Alex there, and they shared ideas and technical expertise. It was a really big project, and we did occasionally need to find extra time and encouragement to move it on. And like many projects, these things happen around other tasks, and it was important to keep a kind of light touch on it to encourage its completion. It's sort of on top of the day job, but also an enthusiasm that both of them shared. So this picture is when Alex and Simon came together at another symposia in South Africa, where they presented their work to the wider community. The game was also nominated for a South African National Science and Technology Forum South 32 Award in the Data for Research category and selected to compete in the 9th International Educational Games competition. It was promoted by the African Doctoral Academy to their 9,000 subscribers and by the influential Force 11 group. And we received external offers to translate the game into French and Spanish, and UK universities have requested customised versions, which are now in development. We also shared its success in our institutional news flashes, and we used a version of it in our own UK regional collaboration, GW4, for our own researchers, and showcased it, of course, in our annual report to Senate. So lots of lovely stuff coming out of that, and a real opportunity just to use somebody's idea and to make it fly, but to make it fly maybe in a way that gave us the exposure that we would never have had otherwise. So March 2020 found myself and a colleague out in South Africa again with a new idea to discuss a new project around supporting joint PhD students this time by using our information skills to map our institutions, each other's institutions, to aid navigation for these students who have a home in both institutions but are familiar with one and not so familiar with the other. So how do those two institutions layer on top of each other so you can find probably the same services but probably in different places? So we'd imagine this would support actual visits, but we're now reimagining it around the virtual landscape. I was on the last flight out, arriving back on the 23rd of March 2020, just in time to lock down my library. And during the pandemic, we kept in touch and we shared approaches and understanding of best practice for our service delivery. I think we both very much benefited from this wider perspective, and certainly from our perspective, South Africa, unfortunately, is well aware of pandemics. Is it the word pandemic if it's simply in one continent? I'm not quite sure. Apologies if I'm not sure of that one. But if you think about Ebola, they've had to have responses to such things in the continent of Africa. And so their experience was really interesting and very beneficial. And they were also at a slightly different stage to us, which is why I was still out there when we were coming back and locking down. So it was a very interesting contact all the way through this time. And I was delighted that I was also on the first flight back on the 11th of October 2021. That was the day South Africa came off our red travel list. I've been invited to speak at their symposia, and that was the next day. So on the Friday, they announced that South Africa was off the travel list. On the Monday, I was on a flight. On the Tuesday, I was back, and it felt like being back at home again. It was really nice. Discussions have continued about our next project. We're still talking with each other and still working closely. Ellen is coming over to visit me later this year, and we're both going to be at IFLA. And then in September, I'm leading her triennial library inspection back out in South Africa again. So the collaboration is still very strong, and we are still finding lots of things to talk to each other about and lots of new initiatives and sharing those incidental networking conversations that you always have, where you suddenly find something else that you could talk about that's interesting. So I'm going to round off just by thinking a little about this. These are our two university libraries here. The top one is ours at night. It always looks very impressive at night, I think, with the lights on. We are 24/7. We were the first 24/7 library in the country. So actually closing on the 23rd of March, it's the first time pretty much we've been shut since 1996. Bit of a surprise. The one underneath is maybe a little bit of a better view of how the underground library works. So you can see the white bit towards the back here. This is a little bit where you can step out, but the library is underneath here. It's an incredible construction. The person who gave the money for the library was very keen that the students would have a space where they could come together and sit in the beautiful sunshine in the beautiful country that is South Africa, and that they could sit on top of the knowledge of the institution, which I think is rather a beautiful way of looking at it. So I'd like to end with some thoughts around why this is working for us as librarians and what we gain. I think the reason it works is we've given it time. We've had ideas and we've made things happen. I think it's hard in addition to our day jobs, but we have enthusiasts to nurture these ideas and to draw and build on our resources. We've reported up, we've ensured our contribution and our enthusiasm is recognised. It's been very worthwhile. We've communicated across and down, making sure that our colleagues and staff understand what's happening, are engaged and are involved. And we've joined in with conferences, we've listened, we've shared and we've contributed. We've ensured that this work fits with our own direction of travel and our aims, and we've built trusted relationships at all levels. And most of all, perhaps, we've really enjoyed it. And then if I could work out how to move to my other screen, I would move away from this so that I can see you all.
Yes, I can only see some people, so taking questions would be fun. So,
how's that? Has that worked?
Perhaps if you stop sharing your screen.
Now I have on one screen, but maybe not on the other. Stop
not
sharing.
On the other.
There we go. How's that one?
That's it. And now I can see everybody.
Lovely.
Makes chairing the meeting so much easier. You can't believe. Thank you so much, Kate, for an absolutely fascinating talk. I think we all envy you, your opportunity to go back and forth to such a beautiful place.
It's interesting, isn't it? I wonder if I'd be so keen if it was somewhere else. I don't know. I think I probably would be, but you never know.
You never know, do you? But you were lucky. So I hope you're willing to answer some questions. You have some time to answer some questions. I have a question, certainly, but does anybody else have any questions first? Who'd like to go first? Anybody got any questions? Well, I shall start then. You spoke right at the beginning and then a number of times about the importance of the individual relationships, people getting on well. And of course, you two as the two library directors getting on well. And I wondered how arrangements like the ones between your two libraries can easily be made sustainable over a long period without being dependent on enthusiastic individuals. What sort of arrangements would you recommend?
Yes, I think that's actually very much on my mind because Ellen is coming up to retirement now. And so that is something I am wondering about. And if I were to move, would it continue? I think it would be harder because I think the institutional engagement with South Africa doesn't necessarily always recognise what professional services are up to. It's very much around the researchers going out and seeing each other and meeting each other. And I think it's something about really keeping the visibility of the benefits of the professional services working collaboratively that allows the engagement to continue. It requires resource. It requires somebody to invite somebody to something, someone to put the hand in the back pocket and pay for a flight, or to recognize the benefit of the time that's spent and give time for the projects. I think it does need it at a relatively high level. And I think if Ellen and I weren't in post and weren't pushing it, I suspect it may well have fallen by the wayside by now, but I do think that would have been a waste. With regard to sustainability, I think the making friends with Ellen's friends is very good. That engenders a connection that's wider than just the one institution. I think that and making friends and understand and having links at a level that's not just necessarily the heads level is a very good thing as well, and keeping the communications really open. But I think the most important thing is the institutional buy-in, something we've had to work really hard at, because it's a bit of a dull reason, but Bath is not very good at, it's very good at making friends with people, but it's not particularly good at getting that through all of our slightly arcane systems to be able to recognise fully an international partnership in a way such as you would if you had joint PhD students. So we've been trying to get that through our institution for about the last 4 years, but it's really difficult to navigate our committees because we haven't done it yet. Stellenbosch can do it. They're doing it in spades, so it's not a problem, but we're finding that slightly tricky. So I think once that's established, then it'll be a much more robust relationship that's not so dependent on the two of us. But I think the more we talk about what we do, the more it becomes part of how we engage with another institution. And the other project that I mentioned, which is about joint PhDs navigating each other's institution, is intended to do just that. My intention with that is for it to become a template that when we negotiate a joint arrangement with another institution, that template that we have is one that sits within the papers that we need to fill out, that maps the institution's support services to each other, and hopefully that then allows also the visibility of the library within a partnership.
Okay, we all know that institutional priorities do change though. So do you think the libraries would retain a relationship if that were to happen?
Yeah, I think I think it's unlikely that Bath would want to move away from Stellenbosch because the research is really interlinked. And the more we go down that route, the more it is. It's the joint PhDs it's causing us a slight problem, but there's a load of ad hoc arrangements in place, much to the horror of some of the people who are more conversant with the protocols that we should be going through. So I think there's a real will for that. It also fits very well with the University of Bath's international strategy, and I think as well with Stellenbosch's, because you need to play internationally. You need those international co-authors to get your papers up to be recognised. You need that for the world rankings. It's really, really important. And we know that we have areas of strength that overlap with Stellenbosch, and therefore those individual relationships between the researchers, I think, are also the thing that's going to keep it going. The game is for us to make sure that the library is considered within that, such that this kind of innovation that we can bring can work alongside it.
Absolutely. Does anybody have any further questions for Kate? Ian?
Yeah, I've worked slightly with Ellen. She was president of IFLA.
Yeah.
2010-ish, but it was in Gothenburg when Bob McKee died.
Yeah.
And she handled that very sensitively. You know, I was with the British Party. In fact, I was with Bob's group the night he died.
Oh,
so you know, my memories of her are very good. So I can imagine she's a very good person to work with. Yeah,
she is, Ian. Yeah, she's absolutely super. Yeah.
That's me.
Okay, Aidan, I think you had your hand up. You're muted.
You mentioned ad hoc projects just now. Could we hear of one or two of these?
Well, I think it's more when you have somebody who is loosely supervising a research student, if you see what I mean. So one of our academics, for example, who's got a relationship with somebody else at Stellenbosch, they say, oh, my student's very interested in this. You're a bit more expert in it than me. Could you have a chat? So those kind of relationships, I think, are happening on an ad hoc basis within the university. So I think that's probably what's on my mind. The other stuff is kind of things that when we sit down together so last time I went out with one of my faculty librarians, Karina Bradshaw, who looks after the science faculty for me. And that was around, you know, conversations. She was chatting to different people to the ones that I was chatting to. We were talking about how our services were working. We were talking about, wouldn't it be nice if so-and-so could have a chat with so-and-so. So not so much projects, perhaps, with regard to the library, but possibly about making other connections. So I think that's probably the sort of projects is possibly a little bit of a red herring, but yeah, those connections and those more informal relationships, if you like, highly beneficial, I think, but not formalized.
Alice, I think you wanted to say something.
Yes. Do you have the arrangements between Bath and Stellenbosch ever run into problems because of the legislative differences in the way they are set up and the conditions I can't say it.
Yes, I know what you mean. Yeah.
In other words, do local laws get into tie you in knots, or actually could you ever find yourself actually breaking local law totally inadvertently?
Kate, you do not have to answer that.
In my other life, I'm a magistrate, so no. Horribly law-abiding. No, I know exactly what you mean. I think probably the one thing that's on my mind at the moment is around, probably not so much about laws, but more about license agreements and license arrangements.
Those are legal agreements.
Of course they are. So so when we need to make very, very sure that we don't give access to things that we cannot give access to, if you see what I mean. And that's why our emphasis for the particular project that we were doing was predicated really on there being joint PhD students. So what that means is that the student is registered at both institutions and is a bona fide student of both, and therefore they are perfectly entitled to look at all of our resources, as opposed to these kind of more ad hoc arrangements where somebody's chatting to so-and-so and says, oh, we've got a super database, you might want to have a look at that. No, they can't. And we want to make very, very sure that that access is not available. So at the moment, we're just putting that project on hold until we've got the joint PhD sorted out, because despite the interest in it from others, we really do get to some barriers there when we're saying, no, you cannot access that because our licenses won't allow it. And you know, clearly we wouldn't endanger our own community with, you know, the power of somebody flicking a switch and switching off the American Chemical Society for us by letting people, you know, roam free from Stellenbosch all over the place, and vice versa. So yeah, we are careful.
Because I think that's a problem a lot of people trying to set up such things don't necessarily appreciate until some awful hiccup or incident occurs, and then they're absolutely shattered.
Yes, and I think really what we thought with the project is that we shouldn't be looking really at those kind of necessarily those separate licenses and resources, because I mean they are quite ubiquitous really. People, you know, Stellenbosch probably subscribing to very similar things to the things we're subscribing to anyway, so you can access those for your own institution if you're only a member of one of them. But we are thinking more about things like, so if you're an international student and you actually arrive in another country and you're trying to get on with your research and you've got a limited period of time, actually navigating that institution is quite hard. You know, your skills sessions may be in the library, they may be in a doctoral college, you may have called the doctoral college something completely different.
20 miles away.
Well, exactly. So how do you find this stuff and where is it? And in researching the project at Stellenbosch, we found a couple of people who had got joint PhDs with another institution. This was in Germany, and they were saying there's all sorts of financial stuff. So they found that when they went to Germany, some of the things that they had to pay for to access at Stellenbosch were freely available to them as students in Germany. So had they known that, they wouldn't have paid the Stellenbosch thing, they would have waited till they got to Germany. So there's all sorts of things that you suddenly find out about that could be quite helpful.
Thank you.
Jamie, I think you had your hand up, and then Sally.
Okay, let me start with taking my hand down, because that's the hardest part really, isn't it? Maintenance. My name's Jamie. I am heavily involved in transnational education, just over the water, or the River Severn in Cardiff Met. We've got some 10,000 students studying in our main partners, non-UK, and 10,000 in the UK. So yeah, it's interesting to hear your take on that. We're organised slightly differently. I'm the kind of TNE rep for the library, rather than it be sort of head of libraries travelling out. They've never travelled out really, so it would be me that does the travelling and the talking and that sort of thing. I suppose in terms of questions, is it research only you do, or do you franchise any of your courses for teaching purposes? That would be my first question.
Yeah, so this is why we don't need to get involved in TNE arrangements with our licenses, because we don't. We have we don't have any franchise courses anymore, as far as I'm aware. Oh no, might have one at City of Bath College. I'm just trying to think about that. No, it's not. It's licensed, it's not franchised. So no, they're not our students. Okay. None, apart from if we had a joint PhD, they wouldn't be our students. But the closest we've got to it is actually again in South Africa. I mean, clearly we have distance learning students and they're scattered all over the world, but they're ours. But we do have a course that we run in South Africa out of what's it called, Fort Harare, which is further up the coast on the Garden route. I did think that because they're Port Elizabeth, I thought, well, that'd be nice. I could go down the Garden route and I could go and visit them as well. But in actual fact, it turns out that they are our students still, but we teach them there, but we do not give them a library there. They use our library because they are our students. And so that's the closest we've got at present. And people like the international educational doctorates. But again, those are our students. They just happen to be somewhere else, and they don't really have a home anywhere else. In Port Elizabeth, there, as far as I'm aware, they just rent some rooms that they go and are taught in. But they're taught by our academics, and they use our library. They just happen to do it out in South Africa.
That sounds much easier to manage.
It is much easier, yeah.
Yeah, and how often do you fly out then every year? Do you go once a year, or do you?
Every couple of years it seems to have been. That's when their symposium is, and that seems to be the thing that's the trigger. So I think I was invited there first of all as a kind of courtesy because our VC had sent me out to go visit. And then after that, it became just a regular thing that they always seem to have something they'd like me to chat about. Alex came with me one year to present about the research data management game. And yeah, Karina came with me, and that was from money that we had bid for at our institution to go out to look into the idea of this navigating the institution thing. So the project, the money followed the project, but they're very generous when we are there. They tend to pay for our hotel and stuff, which is very kind of them. It was very nice.
Nice. Yeah,
I know.
It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen for us. But,
no, well, their symposium was in a vineyard this year, which was incredibly nice because that was the biggest outdoor space that they could find because it was just very close to, well, as I said, it was incredibly close to not being able to go there. I'd recorded everything ready to just press a button. then the opportunity arose.
We had a few sort of proto networks developing before 2019, before COVID. And they were mainly sort of spin-offs from List Pearl, the List Link list. And they were between me, UE, and University of Greenwich, people that, and Coventry, people that sort of handle those kinds of issues with TNE. But we didn't know whether we could extend the invitation to you. I don't know whether it's going to ever be relaunched, or we had a good little mini conference down in Greenwich before that happened. So I definitely think of you from now on.
Oh, thank you.
My final question really is, you mentioned your plans were for the future of workforce development. Now, we were talking about this in CILIP yesterday as one of the kind of adapting to the post-pandemic panaceas. I think that was Ian's thing of the future of work, basically. I should imagine that's occupying the majority of your time at the moment. So what's your plans for this year then, as your CILIP presidential route map?
So as Leslie said, my background is very much in the professional registration side of CILIP. That's the thing that's really inspired me. It's supported me all the way through my career. And I started in 2000 as an assessor on what was then Chartership Board, eventually chaired it, and then led the relatively recent review of professional registration, which saw the Sector Development Committee forming and formalising those links between professional development and CILIP Board, which I think is incredibly important because I think it's one of the things that's most highly regarded by the members of CILIP, actually. It's the networking and the professional development, isn't it? So Keith Wilson led a recent review of the PKSB, the Professional Knowledge and Skills Base, which of course is a kind of de facto skills standard for our profession, isn't it? The reason I mention all of this is because what I've been doing recently is working with CILIP, who are an employer partner. And so I've been working with CILIP to make use of the new PKSB, not simply through putting people through professional registration and encouraging them, because there's a limit to how much you can do that when your institution can't pay for their membership, but I do try. But it's about using that skills standard and mapping ourselves against it. The standard now as a PKSB has got an awful lot of stuff around data and other such skills in there. It also, of course, CILIP has embraced the knowledge management community. And so you've got that side as well. I know the PKSB has been used very strongly by the NHS as well. For their FedIP qualifications. So all of this, I think, is incredibly interesting to me. So it's not exactly future-proofing workforce development, but it's thinking really in the context of what our future skills may be and using the PKSB as a vehicle for that. I've got interrupted in what I was doing. So I was partway through doing that. We'd done a questionnaire, we'd surveyed all staff, we'd made it so it doesn't feel threatening. This isn't about telling people what they have to do in the future. This is about us facilitating a staff development program that's targeted and tailored towards the skills that we think we're going to need for the future and the direction of travel for our people. So we're now at the stage where we're looking at that. We're looking at it in conjunction with a new university strategy and thinking about how we can best fill those gaps as we go through. I'm not a great one for radical change in a workforce. I think if we can do things gently and do things together, so much the better. So that's my cunning plan at the moment. But to use that as a base, so we have an evidence base as why are we doing this and what's it for and where do we think it's going to take us? And also maybe something about the visibility of us within the university as owners of digital. I do think because the better we do things, the more invisible we are. And sometimes we have to go out and wave a flag. So this is going to be a bit of flag waving for me.
Okay, thank you very much. I've monopolised you enough. I'll let you have Sally now for the next question. Okay,
yeah, Sally, you have your hand up. So
yeah, I have to figure out how to get my hand down again as well.
Yeah.
There's too many buttons on these virtual meetings. I'm like, no idea where I'm going half the time. Anyway, sorry. Hello, Kate. I'm Sally and I work at the University of Glasgow Library and involved in collection development, and kind of doubling back a bit to some of what Jamie and you were discussing earlier on in his question. Aside from the naughty issue of licenses and whether students are or are not yours, what I'm interested in at the moment, the university as a whole is developing a master's programme in reparative justice in collaboration with the University of West Indies. And the involvement that we mostly have is through our archives and special collections, looking at some of the items that we have, the provenance of those items and things related to the funding of the university and the employment of the people who funded the university.
Yes,
and I think the primary item that we're working with is a slavery Bible. But what I'm interested in is if you have any hot tips or stellar advice for how I can ingratiate the rest of the library's holdings and value into that programme of work. Because they seem quite focused on the archives and special collections.
Yeah.
And so far, I haven't been able to find a way to shout loud enough about the rest of what we've got going on.
It's really interesting, isn't it? I know Glasgow is doing a great deal of work around the kind of inclusive and decolonising, etc., etc., etc. My sister's actually an academic at your place, Jude Robinson. I don't know if you've come across her. It's very much her area, actually. She's interested in this sort of thing. Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Sometimes it's that nobody cares about the archives, and sometimes it's that nobody thinks there's any relevance about what's going forward. And I think we have to think really, really, really strongly about how we build our reading list for tomorrow, and how we look at our collections holistically and understand the biases that are ingrained within them. Don't you have somebody with a fantastic job description or job title at Glasgow that's quite innovative around disruption as well? Is it somebody of curator of discomfort?
Yes, so that's Zandra Yeaman, and she's at the Hunterian Museum. Yes.
I mean, I think there is something there, isn't there? There's something about looking at our current collections that we absolutely have to do to recognise our biases and to look at how we might move things forward. And maybe that's the conversation to spark with the academics to say, what do your reading lists look like? And how do our collections reflect what your you need, such that we don't make the same mistakes again. I was talking to a member of council recently who came, well, actually just earlier today, she came to have a look around the library. She was talking about collections that they have at Bristol Zoo, funnily enough. And she was talking to our archivist. And then she said something along the lines of, you have to be very careful about what you keep, don't you? Because it might not reflect very well on your institution. And our archivist, being a fantastic archivist, said she didn't exactly say, get over yourself, but she said there is a truth that needs to be told. and you do not rewrite history, was what she was trying to say. She said, from a promotional perspective, you can choose to show what you choose to show, but you need to keep things that are true to the period of time, and to what actually really did happen in the institution. You can't pick it all up and brush it under the carpet. So I think there's a place for challenging books within our collections. There's a place for misguided books within our collections, perhaps, that we wouldn't agree with now, but we need to make sure that we frame those properly and that those are understood by the people who are accessing them. I think we have a responsibility to our user community that we can't just let people loose in the shelves necessarily in that way without telling them what it is and equipping them with the skills to be able to be critical about what it is that they're looking at. And we all know that as librarians, but I think maybe that's a way in but it's about reading this, isn't it? It's about your collections. It's about how you get in there around your information literacy critical skills, which the next couple of years of students are possibly sadly lacking in, because I don't know where the time has come for them to be able to have those skills to surround them, given the focus that's had to be on the curriculum in such a turbulent time for them. My two are they got hit by GCSEs and A levels in 2020. Hurrah! So yes, I think there's such a place for librarians in that critical thinking and that looking at the current collections, and also for academics to engage with the library about what you want your reading lists. I think that's probably, for me, that would be the way in. But tell them you want to make them uncomfortable.
Oh, they know that. They know that already. I think I'm possibly not allowed to meet too many of them because I'm too loud anyway. But actually, interestingly, Jamie's nodding. You're not supposed to nod at that, Jamie. You're not meant to agree that I'm too loud.
I'm nodding. I am nodding. Yeah, that's fine.
We had a visitor from Utrecht at the University of Glasgow this week. This is not what I was going to ask you about, but it's popped into my mind. And she was saying that there is no longer a library school anywhere in the Netherlands.
Okay.
So all of their new library staff are unqualified.
Interesting. I suppose it's quite an interesting question as to what you mean by qualified, though.
Well, this was the conversation that we were having, and she was saying that actually they were starting to know, so it hadn't seemed to be an issue. But they are starting now to realise when it comes to the information literacy skills that while the staff they are employing have teaching and critical thinking skills, they are not going to that next level and thinking critically in the broad way that the librarians they have that have been through library school did.
Yeah, it is really interesting, isn't it? I mean, the reason I make the conversation about qualified, not qualified is an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think there are ways of engaging people into the profession. I know I'm welcoming research data people in who have come through the academic route rather than through the library route, although clearly made very good use of a library to get to where they are. But the way we are using professional registration to be able to ground our ethics as well as our skills in that, and to encourage the reflective practice that I think we as practitioners learn through library school.
That's Martine was saying a bit of that, and what her and her colleagues in the Netherlands are looking to do is to establish ways to share the knowledge and skills that they have to the younger members of staff in their teams, or sorry, younger to the profession, not necessarily younger in age. How they can share those skills in a formal and informal way, to make sure they're not lost.
I think that's really important. I think as well there's possibly a role for CILIP. I mean, it's interesting looking across at library associations in different countries. We have a reciprocal arrangement with Lianza and with ALIA in New Zealand and Australia, such that we can recognise their professional qualifications if they come to work here, and vice versa is the idea. And it'd be lovely to kind of, square that circle or triangle, if you like. But I do wonder about the about other associations in other countries, and there has been an idea with the PKSB being such a gold standard, really, that maybe there's some potential for licensing that in other ways, and other countries making use of it to be able to look at what the skills are. That, I mean, certainly if you were to try to say that you've got every single skill in the PKSB, I think you'd be exhausted, but there are things there that you pick for your particular areas, aren't there? So I think that might be another way forward, but I think it's a massive shame that we don't necessarily see the recognition of this. I mean, you wouldn't call somebody an accountant and they hadn't got any accounting skills, would you? And just because they can add up. So you'd need to be very careful about that. And my apologies, yes, Fort Hare, not Terrari, totally the wrong name, but they both began with H. So
well, thank you very much. And it sounds like there might be scope for licensing the PKSB to the Netherlands.
Well, that would be lovely. I'll mention it to Nick.
There you go.
Thank you very much.
Are there any more questions for Kate, I can't see any more hands up. So I just maybe want to end up with one more, bringing together the themes from your talk. If you were to give one piece of advice to a library entering a new international partnership who wanted to get the best out of it for the greatest number of staff, what would you propose?
I think there has to be value in it. I think that value comes through from recognizing the strategic ambitions of the organization that you work for. You can make up your own value as much as you like and have things that are nice projects, but if it's not recognized institutionally, you're not going to get the support. So I think in all things, you need to align to that institutional imperative and the driver that takes you there in the first place. But then I think you've got to use your imagination and get really creative. Do something interesting. I
think, yes, being creative and interesting does seem to be the key to success, doesn't it? And you've certainly demonstrated how well that can work. So I think probably we have run out of questions. So thank you so much, Kate, for a fascinating presentation and for stimulating such an interesting discussion. Yes, we wish you well for the ref tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And anybody else in the audience who are awaiting those results. It's a massive thing in UK higher education. So any libraries in UK higher education will be waiting with interest. So thank you again, Kate. And
absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
No, it's been a pleasure on our part. Oh, Jamie, your hand is up.
No. My hand is clapping.
Oh, your hand is clapping. We can all clap in a minute. So I will just round off then by saying do join us for future informals. There aren't any scheduled at the moment, but there will be soon, I hope. So keep an eye on our social media channels and our email lists, and join us again soon.